The difference between someone that's really good and a master is the master responds slightly better, slightly more efficient, slightly more powerful.
Yeah.
But you have to reach that point. If you haven't reached the point of instinctual response, then you haven't reached that mastery level.
In this episode, I'm joined by Sensei Eddie Garcia. His martial arts journey began with judo at UC Santa Barbara under Sensei Ken Oda, where he also served as team president. From there, he went on study under Tak Kubota at Gosoku Ryu Karate and Buksan Kong in traditional Southern Chinese martial arts. In this conversation, we talk about cross-training in martial arts, when it helps, when it doesn't, and why building a strong foundation is more important than collecting techniques. We also explore the gap between dojo training and real world application, and what it actually means to move beyond the technique in something more spontaneous and adaptable. If you ever question your own training or wonder what it really means to truly understand what you practice, I think you'll find this conversation worth reflecting on. Let's get started. Hello, Sensei Eddie. Welcome to the Shugyō Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Before I dive in, I'd love to find out a little bit more about your martial arts journey. Can you talk to us about how did you get started? What kept you motivated to training for all these years?
Well, I got started largely because my brother joined judo when I was in high school, and he joined the local judo club. And it just so happens that the Buddhist church was right across the street from my high school. I watched some of it, but they also came and gave a demonstration at my high school. And I didn't do anything with it then until I got to college. I went to UC Santa Barbara and I joined the judo club and the team. And I ended up competing for about 5 years with the UCSB judo team, and I became judo club president. So we competed all over the state of California, um, at many tournaments, and that was the beginning.
Looking back, because I know that you have trained in different styles, and I know that we're going to touch on that from the early experience too, because you told me on our pre-interview call, like judo wasn't the first choice, but then that's what the most accessible, back in the time. Is that true?
Yes. Well, you have to remember that back then, karate really wasn't everywhere. And in fact, the university was looking for an instructor for a few months.
Hmm.
Judo has been available in the U.S. Probably since the 40s, and there was no karate instructors in Santa Barbara at that time. So what ended up happening is, I joined the judo club, and I was fascinated by all the judo technique and the judo throws, and I couldn't wait to go to each class to check it out to see what I was going to learn. And so that was very motivating for me. But we still wanted to take a karate class, and eventually they were so desperate to get an instructor that they brought in a brown belt who was about to get his black belt, and he taught for a while until he got his black belt. And he was actually a taekwondo guy. And then shortly after that, he left right away, and a goju master instructor came, and he was very qualified. He was a traditional goju master, and he taught a few classes. But I didn't really get into it heavily with karate because I got very busy my senior year.
Mhm.
I was taking engineering and economics. That pretty much was it. But you have to remember at that time, a lot of martial arts weren't really available. It's not like today where you have schools in multiple schools in every town, every city,
Mhm.
and you could select what you wanted. Uh, my wife was reminding me the other day that there was no sushi anywhere, and sushi was a strange thing back then.
Mhm.
You know, I remember I was working up in Vandenberg, and we looked for a Japanese restaurant. We found one,
Mm.
and it turned out to be a Chinese restaurant. So that's how rare things were back then.
And then at what point, while you're doing judo in UCSB, it becomes more of just a practice. You're because you're really passionate about it. When we talk along, people listener will know that you not only practice, multiple martial arts, you also are a historian. You write about masters from before too, so you know a lot about the subject. Like, how do you get more into it as you move along?
Somehow I was always intrigued by the techniques of martial arts, the how clever and ingenious some of the techniques were. And when I was growing up, I was tall for my age, so I didn't really have to worry about attackers very much. I was taller, so it was like tended to leave me alone, but I knew I needed to learn some self-defense, right? So I always took it a little bit more serious in that I really saw that it could be very effective. The judo helped a lot in several ways. One is that it was close range grappling techniques that really worked well. Um, but I began to realize that I had been in school fights before, and I realized that there's a lot of punching going on,
Mhm.
uh, in an encounter, any encounter.
Yeah.
So I knew that as soon as I had a chance to find a good instructor, then I would seek a good karate instructor. It so happens that I went to watch a world karate tournament, and Takuboda gave an exhibition. Now, I didn't know it, but when I moved to Glendale, his school was right around the corner from me.
Nice.
So I said, "Oh, I know who he is." And I joined in 1980, and I remained with him for 20 years.
Yeah, I'd love to ask you for some stories. I've been told, right, urban legend, right, that
Yeah.
the old timer in karate are more tough than what we do right now. Can you attest to that? And can you share some of the stories that tough out the tough guys were back in the days?
Oh, yeah. Believe me, they were tough. Yeah. Well, I was talking to a friend of mine, and by the way, his name is Velma Heilovic, and he's eighth eighth dan with Kubota, and he was like 7, 8 time champion. Got third place in Tokyo. I think it was Tokyo or Paris at a world tournament. But when we used to train there, he reminded me that I was from the second generation. He was the first.
Mm,
So there was still a lot of these guys that were really, really tough from the first generation when Kubota first arrived. And he had a school in Hollywood, and then he moved to Glendale eventually. But we had a lot of people like Tony Tolners, John Gelson, uh, Val, Boban Petrovich, all these guys who had quite a reputation and a string of wins, you know. And at that time, in the Japanese styles, I would say that the other most competitive school was Sensei Nishiyama's people, the
mm.
JKA. And so we used to hold tournaments and in-house tournaments with them. But we had a lot of sparring. Kubota loved sparring. And so these guys were really good. And when I got there, I was just a green belt when I got there. And I learned very quickly that this was a tougher school. I mean, if you did not have guts to stay, you, you were going to get destroyed. So I was willing to take the beatings, the getting beaten up for about 3 years before I could hold my own, but these guys were really, really good. And what was good about it was that they were so many of them. You'd come to class and there was like 12, 15 senior black belts. And these guys were really good. So I thought it behooves me to stay and learn from these guys and s- s- you know uh learn the techniques that these guys are very successful with, you know. And so for me it was a challenge to my goal was to be as good as they were, to be able
Mm.
to keep up with them. um and so I began training, and I used to train 3 4 times a week, and sometimes two classes. And one time, at least the ones that I remember, I did three classes, including the weapons class, you know.
But
Both the
looking back, what do you think at that period it shaped your training the most? Is it because you are competitive and you want to be as good as those senior black belts, or it's just the environment? Because I forgot where I read that if you want to judge how good a school is, look at how many senior black belts still train at the classes. So the more that they are, then you know that the school is better because even though they're advanced, they keep coming back to class. So do you think that's truth to that?
there's a lot of truth in that. um it's not an absolute, because some schools attract people that want to do this more laid back, sport oriented, for a different purpose, like exercise and that kind of thing, or Olympic style competition. But it's generally true, I think, that you're gonna when you have a large number of senior black belts, they have a lot of experience. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so you learn from their experience, because if you're smart, you'll really pay attention to what they're doing and how they're doing it and why their techniques are successful. You know, I used to look at him and say, okay, he's making this certain technique work. Why am I not making it work? And then I'd pay attention and I'd see the details. He's using particular footwork or particular timing. A lot of these things become clear to you after a while. Not at first, because you're so busy trying to learn the basics, but once you do, knee dan level, I would say, particular knee dan. Shodan, you're still kind of new. But you're learning quickly. As you know, you learn things quickly in the beginning, and then it's a little bit slower, but more meaningful. You learn about strategy, you learn about timing, rhythm, you know, energy, conserving your power, using your power, developing power, developing speed, all these kinds of things, footwork, angles. I mean, there's a lot of other things that you learn. But also, what I noticed is that each fighter was different. Some were short, some were tall, some were fast, some are slower, some are clever, some have, a better footwork. And you learn from each of these. And when you have such a variety of advanced black belts that are doing all these things, then you get to work with them. So I tested myself over many, many years of sparring with these guys, you know, failing and succeeding, until you start succeeding more than you're failing, then you're on the right track.
Speaking of that, we talk about something very important, and you kind of mentioned that, right? So, and especially I been wanted to ask you this question. So you train in judo, you train in karate, and you also do Chinese martial arts. So,
Mm.
always want to ask this. So, if someone do you make a crazy attempt to punch you, then how do you determine which technique to use? Right, because you're so diverse in your training. Like, does it come from a reflex, or do you like calculate, how they are and use whatever technique from the style that you use?
Okay, that's a good question, but the way I'm going to answer it is this way: it becomes spontaneous
Hmm.
after the technique is ingrained in you. Okay, that's why you can't go from art to art when you're just a beginner. You have to have a really good, strong foundation. Okay, then you learn the other techniques from some other style, which I was what I did, and I was able to learn faster. Okay, and I remember someone asked my sifu Buksam Kong of the kung fu, the Hungar style. What's Eddie gonna do? And my sifu said he can do what he wants. He picked it up. You know, he didn't say he picked it up, but he meant that I was able to pick things up quickly.
Hmm.
And even though they were different, because I had to change my way of thinking about it, about the techniques and how they're applied a little bit differently in that style, and that's true for all styles. But the point is that you get to a point where things become spontaneous. They become instinctive. Okay. So it's not like I'm going to pick a technique from Shotokan, or I'm going to pick a technique from Gosokuri, or pick a technique from Hungar. A lot of people that don't know martial arts, they'll say, well, how would you defend against this kind of attack or that kind
Yeah.
of attack?
Uh-huh.
And, I think you're beginning to realize that you don't know, because at the moment that happens, you react. And that's what you want to be. You want to get to that point where you're spontaneous. You have to practice your art, whatever it is, to the point where it's instinctual. You know, you have the 3 Ks, right? Basics, Kihon, Kata, and Kumite, right?
Hmm.
But those are learning tools, every single one of them. Even Kumite is a learning process. Okay. It becomes yours when it becomes instinctive. Okay. So you just respond. You don't know how you're going to react, because every situation is different, you know, and that's true of self-defense. You don't know how it's going to go. I mean, it could go anywhere. It could go anyhow. But you have to be able to respond. The difference between someone that's really good and a master is the master responds slightly better, slightly more efficient, slightly more powerful.
Yeah.
But you have to reach that point. If you haven't reached the point of instinctual response, then you haven't reached that mastery level.
So you're suggesting that beginner should find and pick a style that they study in, to get better before they even branch out to other, arts. With the
So
technology that we have right now, with this, so many YouTube videos, right? So many social media sharing how you do a kick or how to do whatever technique that you have. Like, how would you guide someone or a listener if they wanted to choose a style? Is it because what you think you like on a YouTube video, or the closest to you, or whoever master that you think are,
I would say the
formidable?
best way is to go to a school, and something's going to appeal to you. One of the styles will appeal to you more than the other.
Hmm.
Not because one is better than the other, but for some reason it appeals to you. Like, for example, there's other styles of karate, like goju, shitoryu, the shotokan, or uechi-ryu, any of the other styles, and they're all a little bit different, but they're all
Hmm.
basically the same. They all do mawashi-geri, ushiro-geri, mai-geri. They all do the basics the same. They just have different techniques that they prefer, right? Um, Remember, karate had no name in the beginning, right? It was just this art that they put together based on other influences like Chinese and other Southeast Asian arts put together. But they did it in such a brilliant way and such an effective way. But I would say visit these schools, see what appeals to you, but you need the guidance of uh, an instructor.
Hmm.
You know, you can't just learn from watching videos. It doesn't work. It just doesn't. You need to be there and see the little things. You know, and a lot of times your instructor will be the one that's able to tell you, no, do it this way. Or this works better, or look at your footwork, or how you use your body, all these things that go into teaching what a sensei can teach.
Mhm.
You know?
If you find a good mentor who have done this before or way better than what you are, so by them watching you do whatever that you're doing, not talking about martial art right now, can save you years, sometimes tens of years, right? So by you not going to the wrong direction, because yes, you could train with video, you could train with whatever available online, but then without a
Have you
master,
seen people that have learned from watching? You go,
they
oh
could
my
fix
God.
things that save you years, right? They could say, oh, okay, the way that you can do high kicks is because you are not, turning your hip or whatever that might
Yeah,
be that
that's
they
right.
pointed out. Then if you work on it, then you get better. So
The,
it's subtle things, right? So, sometimes it's very subtle, but you need someone to point it out for you.
yeah, that's exactly right. You need to find the best instructor that you can in what appeals to you, you know, and and work for it earnestly, and train hard. Um, I know I've met many people over the years that say, "Oh, I studied this and I studied that for a little while. I studied this." Well, how long did you study? And they tell me, "Oh, I studied for 3 months," or they didn't learn anything. Give me a break. It's like going to college. You don't just go a little bit, right? You have to finish the course,
Mhm.
right? And if you don't try, you don't really learn. And that's something that I always tell people. Uh, when you're there, make the effort. Try to understand. Uh, and that excites your instructor as well because they do it because they love it, but they also are motivated when they see a student that is sincerely is trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
You know.
So how does one know, or do you know that you're ready to move on, or does your instructor let you to move on? And then second part of this question for you, Sensei Eddie, is how does cross training in different arts help you that one style could not?
Well, to answer that first is you look at your skills and your weaknesses,
Mhm.
yeah, and what you need to fill. When I was in judo, for example, I knew that I didn't understand punching, kicking, and that whole part of fighting, and so I needed to learn that, and I was just fascinated by all of it. But so I was trying to fill that gap. What did I need? Karate. Also, I remember I remember this clearly that the karate people were afraid of the judo people, and the judo people were afraid of the karate people. Because they take you down to the floor and you didn't know what to do, right? And vice versa, right? Look at what happened with Brazilian jiu-jitsu. When
Yeah.
they arrived, they took everyone to the ground, and those guys were like dying cows out on the mat or the floor. They didn't know what to do. They got tied up and they got uh, tapped out. They had to, right?
Mhm.
So you need to be well rounded. If you want to be able to defend yourself properly. Otherwise, you're at a great disadvantage. I mean, you may not survive uh, a, long enough to throw the guy in judo if the guy knocks you out on the first punch.
Yeah. Before you even touch him, they strike
Yeah,
you out.
yeah. Before you can grab him, he already kicked you and punched you, right? And vice versa. Though, if he grabs you and throws you before you have a chance, then you're slammed on the ground at 3 to 4 G's, and you're hurting on that sidewalk. So it's important to know to be well rounded. Your sensei is also a judo black belt, like I am, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so people recognize that. They in the old days they would study one style, and it was really taboo if you studied something else. But but I knew from being into fights that hey, wait a minute, you got to learn a little bit of that. And for me, it was all fascinating.
Yeah, before the karate police come out and get us, I do want to go back to the first question. Like, say you committed to an art, you find a instructor, a master, sensei that
Yeah.
you really engage with.
Respect.
At
Yeah.
what point do you know if you would choose to, right, to go out and cross train in another art? Like, is there a time frame or is it like a certain skill level? Like, how would we
Skill level.
know
I think
a
it's
skill
skill.
level?
I think it's skill level. I think when you see when if you don't have a good background, you don't know what you're looking at. You're not able to make a good judgment about what else you need and what makes sense to you, because you just don't understand yet. Um, so you kind of know yourself when you're ready, but I think it is kind of like Nidan level when you think you can assess other styles a little bit better than before then. Because before then you're still learning your style, and you're still learning all your techniques, your basics, your techniques. It takes quite a while to learn how to throw a good strong front kick,
Mhm.
good strong roundhouse kick, mawashigiri, a good strong back kick, or a good stepping punch, a good reverse punch. I'm not just talking about being able to punch, but I'm talking about what the term iken hisatsu, right? Destructive punch. One that could, if you're in a situation where you have to make one, you got one choice that you have to make quickly, and it has to be a knockout punch. Can you do it? You have to have the confidence to be able to do that. If you don't, you need to work on it. Okay.
Is that what it means to like truly know how to apply what you have learned? Because what you're saying too, it's I've been okay for my sensei Tai Ponte, right? So
Yep.
he will ask me to punch him and then he counter. I know he's gonna punch strong, right? But
Mm.
I feel like life flashed before my eyes. But he has so much control that he just stopped like less than an inch before my chin. If he connects, and then I'm gonna be knocked out. But is it true that when you know how to apply, really I could connect if I wanted, but I could
Yes.
also pull at the last minute if I wanted. So is that the
Very
definition
important.
for how to apply?
It No, it's not. It's let me explain it this way. Control is very important.
Hmm.
Okay. Power is very important. How to generate is very important. What you said is partially true, in that you're able to control the amount of power and the distance properly. Okay. That's training. That's the level that, I mean, you can stop less than an inch, about a quarter of an inch, eighth of an inch. You can do that at that level, at a sensei level. You should be able to. Um, the technique has to be strong. You know, I think I mentioned to you once before that you have to have balance while you do that, and you have to. Um, you can't be on unbalanced, for example, on one leg when you punch, because you don't have your full weight of your body behind the punch.
Hmm.
It's kind of a ripple effect. It's very coordinated kind of punches, and that's why I think that the older style of kumite was stronger and could potentially be used more effectively in the street situation, whereas the newer style kumite is more of a game of tag. You're just touching, you know. But oftentimes I notice that they're they're on one leg. Their stance is not strong either for any technique. It doesn't mean that they can't hurt you. They can give you a bloody nose, but they're not going to knock you out with one punch if they wanted to.
Hmm.
Unless they use their feet, which are a whole different group of larger muscles. My personal opinion is that we shouldn't kick that hard with that kind of power. That's lack of control when you knock somebody out because you kick them in the head. That is a good example of the opposite of what you were talking about, where you have control. You have
Mhm.
control and you have power, but you also have enough control to stop it. Okay, these guys are letting that go and they're kicking people on the head. That's a concussion, you know. We don't want to do that. We want to be able to control what we're doing. And another related point is that you want to be able to strike where you want to strike at the moment that you want to strike. If you see an opening at the high black belt level, you have a split second to execute it successfully, or the opportunity's gone. Like,
Mhm.
say I see that your rib is open. If I don't hit it at that instant, that opening is gone because you moved. So you have to have that kind of control and speed. I don't know. Does that answer?
Yeah, so I think, with your point, you're saying, kicking hard is not the ultimate level. So the ultimate level is, you can kick hard, but I know that when we are practicing at a dojo, or even when I go to competition,
Yeah.
my goal is not to kill you, right? I
Right.
know I could do that, but if I even at the advanced level, I could pull it back, or I could maybe just tap you.
Yeah.
But knowing that if I put my full power into it, I could break it.
Yeah. What you want to do is control it. You want to be able to not only stop when you want at the distance that you want to, whether it's less than an inch or half an inch. I think black belt has to be, you know, eighth of an inch, control. But when you're punching and kicking in a tournament, you're only using 20%, 30% power. You're not using 100%, or else you're going to break his rib or he's going to break your rib, right? You're not gonna you're gonna touch him, but you're not gonna knock him out. You might touch him. Okay. You don't strive to touch him. You strive to get very close so everyone can see that you're strong, you're coordinated, it's focused, it's got kime, focused power, but you controlled it.
Mhm.
See? And I think you
Is
understand.
that
You're very
is that the difference between like the real confrontation from practicing at the dojo and competition training? Is the different level, it's so to speak, right? That you should use. So if you really get into a self defense situation that you really have to defend yourself, then you let it go. But then, obviously, in the dojo, you're practicing with people in the dojo. Be more control and maybe competition a little bit more. So the different level an advanced
yeah.
practitioner should be able to execute.
That's right. That's right. You're only going to use 20, 30% of your power in a tournament because you don't really want to. You're not in a fight, in an actual conflict. You know, you have to realize that control is very, very important. Then, if I do a mawashigiri to your head, I'm not going to try to break your jaw, for example. I'm just going to get close, so eh, and the judge knows that you were well planted, and you threw the kick right to the spot where it would land, right? But you're not gonna knock the guy out. You're not gonna break his jaw or knock his teeth out. You know?
How do you train for that? I'm committing and we're recording, right? So
You
I'm
pull back.
actually admitting and
You
recording with
practice.
adrenaline. With adrenaline at competition, I couldn't control. I tried, right, but at the heat of the moment, I
Not
wanted
yet.
to
You can't.
score.
Not
Yeah,
yet. You can't.
yeah.
But you will.
So how do you train for it?
You train by controlling your distance. I could show you what if you say you're punching makiwara, okay?
Hmm.
But you can also practice stopping. Here, let me measure that. It's probably a eighth of an inch. I can stop, but because I've done it so many times, I can stop. I can stop my fist. You can do it too, but you haven't practiced it enough.
So you hit it, but then you stop an eighth of an inch before you hitting the
Yeah,
makiwara.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And you practice that over and over again, and and you practice that in your school as well. you know. Okay, you mentioned another part of it, and that's the excitement, the
Mhm.
adrenaline.
Yeah.
But you train yourself to remain calm, okay? You don't get intimidated by the other guy. You don't get overexcited. You learn to stay calm. That's one thing that you have to learn to do, is to remain absolutely calm. You know, you watch some of the old JKA fights that are on YouTube, and you'll see that they're perfectly still, and then they'll suddenly explode. Okay. And if you have confidence in your technique, you don't get nervous. You know what that your technique will work if you execute it correctly. Okay. Whether it's timing, speed, all these things, reflex, it takes practice to get to that point, where you're not nervous. And in the beginning, we're all nervous. When we're
Mhm.
beginners, we're all nervous. You go out there and, you know, you,
You
you
get
just
tired too. If you get nervous and if you're stressed,
exactly.
then you
Okay.
get tired really easy.
Well, that's part of it, is energy conservation. You conserve your
Mhm.
strength. If you're a little excited and tense, you're worn out in less than a minute. I was a ref recently at a kung fu tournament. It was a sparring tournament. They do it differently. This guy was just huffing and puffing and, putting his head down. And I go, look, you need to calm down and remain calm, but also develop your stamina, you know, uh, and that takes time. It takes time from doing it so many times that you learn to relax. You learn to, okay, I'm not going to waste my energy. If you get too nervous and excited, you're worn out in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was in judo, that was the first thing I realized, is that we went up to Hayward, Cal State Hayward, I think it was. We competed against them. Our guys lost because they had no stamina. They ran out of
Mm.
steam and they got pinned. Not because they didn't know their throws or all that, but because they just ran out of steam. Okay. So you hit on something that's important, and that's, breathing, calm yourself down, you know, remain calm, conserve your strength, conserve your energy. You know, if you're hopping around a lot, well, you can play tag, but you're not going to be able to deliver those strong blows. If you're too tired, if you're just breathing wrong, that's another thing. See, so
Yeah,
that's
sometimes I'm surprised, like the condition, right? Your body's in so weird, branching out to different things is how you are executing your technique. Maybe the way that you're throwing your punches and kicks wastes a lot of energy versus if a master do it, they do it so efficiently, right? There's almost no effort. So they can kick 100 times and you kick like 10 times and you're huffing and puffing already. So I think that separates, beginner from a advanced practitioner.
yeah, that's a good observation. But that's all true. All of it is
Mm.
true.
I wanted to also get your training on because you do, work with a lot of different people across multiple arts. So let's stay on the topics for self-defense. I know you're opinionated about self-defense from men, women, and children. Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I've come to realize, because that women and children need to train a little bit differently. I trained at some very tough schools, and what I noticed is that only a 4 to 6 females in all those years were strong enough to deal with men. Okay. So I think that not only they go through the regular curriculum, but they should have supplemental training for women and kids in weapons. I think we should start them earlier on weapons, because that's kind of an equalizer. You know, if you have a teenager with a hard stick in his hand, he's got an advantage.
Mm.
you know, if you have a woman that knows how to use a short staff, also, then she's got immediately some advantage. But I have other ideas about that too. And that is, the use of elbows and knees and other things for self-defense. 80-year-old woman will hit you with an elbow, it's gonna hurt if she smashes
Mhm.
you in the nose, okay? So, it's not that they're not capable, but I think that we could train them better by putting on them particular focus on self-defense and weapons, using anything as a weapon.
Is it because you think traditional martial arts are, back then developed by men? So obviously their focus are based on men. And obviously, when you work with kids, right, they're smaller,
Yeah,
they have less power, right?
yeah.
But there are something else that they could do. They move a lot faster than we are, right? They're more agile than we do. So you would say there should be technique or curriculum that we develop for women, like you talk about for the elbow, for the weapons, and for kids, right? Because to match the kind of body composition that they have, or maybe if you ask a kid to fight like an adult would fight mentally, they're not ready for that. So like we have to change it differently to fit into their approach.
Well, the kids eventually will grow up, so they
Hmm.
they do need all the training that everyone else gets, but you can help them on their way to defend themselves by having this additional focus on developing uh, their particular body style. For example, if they're short and small, they better move around.
Hmm.
You They better use their footwork, right, to be able to get an advantage. Otherwise they'll be at a great disadvantage. You know, and so even adults, we do that instinctively. I remember we had a guy named Greg Clark at Kubota's, and guy was like lightning fast, but he had like telescopic legs as well. So if you didn't move fast, if you didn't move out of the way fast, you were gonna catch a Mawashi Giri on the head. So you had to, everybody's different, and you had to figure them out. That was kind of the one of the great things about learning with many different talented people. But in the same way, I remember one of your tests I was at, one of the kids was fighting an adult, and I said, you're smaller, you gotta move around. You
Hmm.
can't sit there in front of this guy and just take all his punches and kicks. You gotta move and be defensive, you know, and there's other things you can do, like crowd them and other things. But they should be trained differently, and women too. I don't want students to have false confidence, you know, and I was seeing that almost everywhere,
Yeah,
including
that you actually brought up a good point because my last previous guest, Carl, he was from the Navy. He also trained in martial arts, so he actually seen real combat. Asked him the same question. He said people have, especially in martial arts, right? They have a false sense of confidence of their ability, right? So when it comes to a real situation, they find out the hard way where training at a dojo, which is a safe environment, versus to the reality of the streets, quote unquote, right? Different. So how do we be honest with our training? Like, does it even make sense to ask you this question? Like, how do you know, like, you feel good, maybe you're the best kumite fighter at your school, but then when you step on the streets, now people might be drunk at a bar, maybe they're intoxicated or they're on drugs. So your punches doesn't make sense. So how does we be honest with our training, actually?
well, the first thing is to recognize that there is that big gap between, you know, interdojo friendly environment that you're training, and that's why I think you have to train seriously about making your techniques strong and work. Okay, and the more experience you have, the better you're going to be at defending yourself. You know, and that's going back to what I said earlier, that I think a lot of the modern kumite is a game of tag. Notwithstanding the fact that they can still hurt you, but it's not. the same kind of power of many being delivered, okay? Or being the skill for that kind of power is not focused in such a way that you can depend on it. You know what I mean? You might just tag him and he make him angry and get his adrenaline going and make him stronger than he was before, you know? So a lot of experience in kumite helps, you know, but reaching to that point of being spontaneous, that's what's going to get you through it. Now, it's always good if you have the kind of experience, you know, in the past. For example, you need to be realistic and think about things like, for example, have you asked yourself, okay, if how many fights do you see on the street where they jump into a front stance or a back stance? Okay, it's not going to happen. They're going to grab you right away. So what does that mean? You're instantly close range. You have to have a wide variety of close range techniques. So you have to, you know, be realistic and be analytical about what you're facing.
Mhm.
You know?
And
And
especially a lot of the technique, if you're on the streets, it's not going to be clean, right? So
no,
at the dojo, like they do straight punch, they do clean techniques. So
yes.
they will do whatever that they can do at you,
Well,
grabbing your face, pulling and things like that.
yeah, th- that's exactly right. But the purpose of those clean techniques and that is they teach you how to execute a good, efficient technique, the most efficient way to do it. That's the whole purpose of the technique is the most efficient way to execute power and speed and all that and focus. But in a spontaneous real situation, you may not be able to execute it perfectly, but you're able to still execute it with power. It's not going to be perfect anymore. It's not going to be pretty anymore. It's going to be rather ugly. You know, there's a saying in the Chinese kung fu that the ugliest technique is sometimes the best because it works. Okay, so it doesn't matter. It will deteriorate, but the whole purpose was that you're able to recover because you know how to execute it, and when you get the opportunity, a good, powerful technique will will come out of you spontaneously.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually, because think about like the older the kata or the technique or the martial artist, the more severe those techniques, gouging the eye, going for the groin, poking the eye. Even, when we talk about MMA, where like all things goes, in the beginning, MMAs was more crazy and violent, but
Yeah.
for right now, they have more rules in MMA even that you can hit the back of the head or things like that. So we make it better because of safety, but then if we go back to the self-defense, then what if people are not fighting with the rule that you have used to? Then
Okay.
how do you react?
Well, think about it this way: all of these, even MMA, as rough and brutal as it can be, it's still fighting under rules. Okay, you're not poking the guy's eye out as soon as you can. That would end it, right? Or grabbing his throat and crushing it at the first opportunity you have. That's not allowed. So it's a sport also. It's a rougher sport for sure. People are going to get hurt. You do see people getting elbows smashed to the head and face and concussions in that, which I don't recommend. It's not necessary to learn how
Mhm.
to do that. You know, you you learned how to do it already. Okay, you don't have to do it. It's not really necessary. But remember, you have to remember that sparring is a game, and you can be a professional at it. If you're Sandan and above, you're a professional at it. I say it's a game between experts, right? Karate people that say you have two godans fighting. They know what they're doing. They're controlling everything, right? But they're sparring. They're not trying to kill each other, and they're not poking eyes out. They're not tearing noses off or tearing ears off. The one thing that I saw the different between the forms in the Chinese styles and the forms in the Japanese styles is the Chinese styles still have these techniques in the forms.
Yeah.
They still have the eye pokes, and they still have the throat grabs, and they still have, the ear tears and other things that, I mean, I know a bunch of them, but there's no point in enumerating them, you know. But some of them, let me tell you, they're very dangerous and they're very damaging. And all of those, you have to remember from history, is those were removed so that it could be taught in the schools. Okay. So we're not fighting with a full repertoire of techniques of original karate jutsu, karate technique. Okay. We're using a strong sport that can be used if we use it in a strong way. You asked earlier about how you choose, and I said it depends on your goal. Are you going to do it just you just want to compete in kata, for example?
Mhm.
Then you just have to, work at performing really well. My goal always was I want to learn how to use what I'm learning. If you want to learn all these things, all it has to offer, it's a longer road.
Yeah.
You got to learn the basics well. You got to learn to be strong. You got to learn to fight well, kumite. You got to learn the kata well, you know, and that's the long road. If you just want to learn to kick and punch, well, you just need to say 2 years, maybe 3, and you're pretty. I always say if you're a black belt, you've got something to offer already. You potentially can be dangerous. Potentially doesn't mean you're a terror, but you can, potentially. One of my rules of thumb is trust no one, no matter what they look like.
How would you suggest an listener think about their own purpose of training? You mentioned there's a lot of different role. I call it the side quest, right? So maybe you want to be better at kicking, then obviously that's the role you go under. You could do kata, or you could go back to like the traditional. There are people do that, right? Old fashioned martial arts. They want to go back only doing the way that old timers do it.
Yeah.
How do listeners think about their current training and actually find the purpose in those trainings?
Well, it depends on what the person, what appeals to them. Again, are they a traditionalist? Do you want to learn the classical stuff? I mean, the original stuff of Okinawa. I mean, there's still people in Okinawa doing it, and there's people practicing original Shorin Ryu and other styles like Uechi Ryu and Goju. Uh, those are very traditional styles. Shotokan is a more modern branch out. For example, think about it. Shotokan doesn't teach weapons, classical Okinawan weapons. They don't. I think at most they teach one staff, the one that Funakoshi's son taught, and he developed that one. But there's both styles. There's other weapon styles. Okay. So not only did they remove the deadly stuff from modern karate do, they also removed the weapons. Okay. So it's a different purpose, you know. You can practice. The great thing is that you can practice it how you want it. I've noticed that in Okinawa now they're teaching the classical style, the sports style, or now they're getting into Olympic. I don't know if you noticed, but in Olympic they've opened up the kata choices that are a sample of all the different styles, and now you're learning kata from different styles, which is okay. I mean, I like the performing good kata. I
Mhm.
particularly was not that great in it, but you know, uh, uh, a good kata is very impressive as well. But it's become a modern performance, whereas a lot of the classical, what's more important to a lot of Okinawans is Do you know the kata and do you know what's in it? And performance is not as important. Now it's becoming more popular, the performance of it. And there's some really good kata performers out there. You know, one comment that I do have is I don't my and my opinions are mine on all
Hmm.
this stuff, but
Yeah.
I don't really uh, find it appealing when katas are performed so fast that they're not really, in my opinion, they're not really executing good kime and kumi and focus. Good
Mm.
kime. They're not. They're so fast that you go, oh wow, that was really fast. Interesting form, but it's hard to see the effectiveness in something that happens so fast that there's no kime in it. But that's just my view of that. Performing and performance should be strong with the proper timing and execution and focus, balance, that kind of from that approach. If it's just really fast, I go, well, and and another, I'll give you another personal opinion is I can't stand the screaming where it's become a popular trend in recent years to just scream the
You mean like the
kata,
ki in the kata?
not the ki. They scream out the name of the kata before they start. You
Oh,
can't even understand what they're screaming. You know, I don't, I don't know. Maybe that's putting their frame of mind in their head. Doesn't appeal to me.
hey, Sensei Eddie. So, for a listener who wanted to connect with you and to learn more about the work and the articles that you have written, what would be a good way to connect with you?
Well, the articles you can find them on in Masters magazine. I've written 4 of them so far. Why do we practice martial arts? One on Grandmaster Paul Durso, who was an early military Marine who studied in Okinawa. And there are a lot of Marines that studied in Okinawa proper, and a lot of them had real knowledge too. Uh, wrote another one on women, Bugeisha, women warriors in history. They have found women's bones in battle yards, battlegrounds, and they're beginning to think that maybe they were involved.
Mhm.
But we'll see when more research is done. And my latest article is about Funakoshi's son, who was, a fantastic innovator and probably the second most important guy in not only Shotokan, but as you know, everybody uses Mawashi Geri now, Ushido Geri, and the stances are different now, but they all trace back to him at when he started teaching them at the universities. So that's an article that's in the current issue of Masters Magazine. And I am interested in the history, and I'm working on a book that I'm picturing as a handbook for instructors so that they know the real history of karate and where it came from and where all the katas come from. Tentatively, I'm calling it Parting Clouds, as if
Right.
you're parting, clearing, clearing the view so that you can have a clear view of history. So hopefully I can sit down and finally put that together, but hopefully not make it too long. I don't want to make something so long that people don't read it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't care about the history, but I do. I think that it reveals a lot of why we practice it the way we do.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Sensei Eddie. I'll definitely keep everyone up to date when Sensei Eddie decided to publish that. And thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today, Sensei Eddie. I have so many more questions that I want to ask you, but love all the answers. And I'll definitely do my own reflection on some of the advice that you gave me.
I hope you got something good out of it.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks. Bye bye.